Hey there folks, John here with Through My Lens, and today I'm coming to you with a watch review. Now, I've got a lot of ground to cover, so right off the bat, let me state, if you have not already checked out my unboxing video, please go watch that because that video does have the story of why I bought this watch. And I intend to do a very comprehensive review, so apologies in advance for the length of this video. Now, before I get into the watch, let me start with a brief word about Omega's packaging and presentation. It's amazing. The wooden box in which the watch comes in is very contemporary looking with a push-button fastener and features soft close hinges for the lid, which gives it a very upscale look and feel. Again, for a better look at the packaging, please do check out my unboxing video, but I did just have to make a brief statement here because many brands fail with their packaging, and Omega has always been really great in this regard. Now, in terms of the watch itself, this is the Omega Seamaster 300m Coaxial Master Chronometer. Its reference 210.3042.20.03.001, and that is a mouthful. The watch has a 42mm case that is water resistant to 300 meters. And it has that water resistance despite the presence of the sapphire case back here, as you can probably see. Not so many years ago, display backs were never put on quote-unquote professional dive watches. Because it would compromise the water resistance. But materials and manufacturing science have evolved to the point where Omega was able to put a display back on this Seamaster and maintain that classic 300-meter water resistance rating. Now, the dial is protected by a domed sapphire crystal, which has a double anti-reflective coating, meaning it's coated on both sides of the crystal. More on that later. Here you can probably see the domed nature of the crystal. Now, I was a little bit concerned that the slightly increased size of this latest iteration of the Seamaster would be perhaps a bit too large for my wrist, but I've not found that to be the case. In fact, I have found the watch to be extremely comfortable and quite aesthetically pleasing when worn on my wrist. Now, inside the case of the Omega Seamaster 300m, sandwiched between this top and bottom sapphire crystal, you'll find the fantastic Omega Caliber 8800. I'll go ahead and put the movement specifications on the screen, but it is, again, the Omega Caliber 8800. It is a master coaxial COS certified movement. With a beat speed of 26,200 beats per hour, with 35 joules and a 55-hour power reserve. And it is METIS rated for +0 to +5 seconds per day in accuracy. All very impressive specifications. This movement has been designed and manufactured with some truly premium and as well as some high-tech features like a freely sprung balance wheel, with a silicone hairspring, which contributes to the 15,000 Gauss anti-magnetic rating. That's about 30% more anti-magnetic than the famed Rolex Milgauss. And that was kind of the anti-magnetic champ for many, many years. You could actually wear this Omega 300m during your next MRI with no impact to movement accuracy whatsoever. So again, pretty darn impressive there. And again, the Omega Caliber 8800 is designed by Omega. It is considered an in-house movement. It's not used in any other watch on the market. Now, for over a decade, Omega has been incorporating the George Daniel designed coaxial escapement into their movements. It was back when I was active as a journalist in the watch industry when Omega first started incorporating the coaxial escapement into their movements. My feelings then are the same as they are today. It's an interesting theoretical innovation, but it doesn't appear to provide any real measurable improvement in either accuracy or service life of the movement. It also brings a potential downside, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in depth shortly. Now, the caliber 8800 also features a rhodium-plated finish with Geneva waves and arabesque. The movement decoration is done with automation, but it is still very attractive and worthy of the sapphire display back, which allows the owner to see it. I have heard some complaints about noise coming from the self-winding rotor on the caliber 8800, but in the week that I've been wearing this watch since I bought it, I really haven't noticed any noise. It's only if I take the watch off and I shake it a bit to get the rotor spinning that I can actually hear anything. So I don't personally see this as a problem. Let me see if I can, I don't know, I'll hold it to the microphone here and see if you can hear anything. But it's not problematic from my perspective, although again, the Rolex self-winding movements are completely silent. Now, the METIS Master Chronometer certification is a fairly recent convention, and I'll confess that I wasn't entirely familiar with METIS prior to buying this watch. METIS is the Swiss Federal Institute of Metrology, which is headquartered in Bern, Switzerland. They define themselves as the federal center of competence for all issues related to measurement and for measuring equipment and measuring procedures. In 2015, in collaboration with Omega, METIS developed a new certification standard for wristwatches. METIS is a Swiss government entity that is entirely separate from Omega, but the testing for the brand's watches is performed at Omega's own factory, where there is a separate office for METIS staff who monitor the testing procedures. Now, despite being conducted at Omega's facilities, the testing practices themselves are governed by METIS, as is the equipment used in the testing process itself. Just like any other fully independent testing facility, brands are able to submit their watches to METIS for chronometer certification, provided that the watches themselves meet the necessary criteria. Tudor, for example, has a version of the Black Bay that is METIS certified. Now, the testing standards involved in obtaining METIS certification are indeed more rigorous than the older COS certification. Standards which haven't really changed in decades for COS. So this is kind of an exciting development that's come about since I've been away from watches. And to be clear, Omega has not abandoned COS certification in order to be METIS certified. A watch must first be COS certified. Now, by the way, Omega has provided a process via either their website or an app for owners to actually obtain the METIS test results. Here's a copy of my own test results that I was able to download and print off for my watch. Again, pretty interesting, pretty neat. I think it's really cool, and it really harkens back to a service which Omega historically provided their customers, whereby you could request a copy of the COS certificate for your individual watch. Now, I do plan to do a separate video where I discuss METIS certification more in depth. This current iteration of the Omega Seamaster received a considerable redesign in 2018 for the 25th anniversary of the Bond Seamaster. The Omega Seamaster actually dates back much further to 1948, but this model debuted in 1993 and gained popularity when Pierce Brosnan first wore it in 1995's GoldenEye. The so-called Bond Seamaster appeared in several more subsequent Bond movies, which brought a great deal of exposure and popularity to the model. The dial of this iteration features a variation of the Seamaster wave pattern, which again debuted back in 1993 on the Bond Seamaster. The wave pattern was gone from the Seamaster from 2012 to 2017, but again made its return in 2018. The dial of this watch is a glossy finished laser cut ceramic dial. It's actually zirconium dioxide, more specifically, as the chemical symbol for zirconium dioxide is printed on the dial. It has a combination of printed lettering and applied markers, which are filled with superluminova to provide low light visibility. Omega cleverly uses green superluminova on the minute hand and the bezel pearl to differentiate them, which is handy, particularly if you're underwater, where it's dark and you want to make sure that you know where that bezel pearl is to help gauge your oxygen levels in your oxygen tank. Now, the laser engraved wave pattern on the dial looks fantastic and is evocative of the first generation Bond Seamaster. The hands of the watch are classic skeletonized hands, which are the same design as the model which first appeared in 1993. The blue ceramic bezel is inlaid with white enamel, which greatly improves contrast and legibility over the previous generation of the Seamaster. I think the Seamaster Professional was the first to use the ceramic in the bezel in terms of Omega watches. Now, the wave pattern of the Omega Seamaster has always been a polarizing aesthetic feature. In fact, the Seamaster generation prior to 2018 again did not even feature the wave pattern. Now, my personal opinion is that the execution on this ceramic dial is extremely well done and provides a really welcome differentiating aspect to a watch that exists in an extremely competitive dive watch segment where watch manufacturers and their designs really do struggle to stand out from one another. I like it. Now, the Bond Seamaster bracelet has been much improved over the generations. It now features some adjustable links that have screws, similar to Rolex. They were previously held in place by rather inexpensive friction pins, which are not considered a feature appropriate for a luxury watch like this. More on that later. Now, the button release clasp is again very reminiscent of the clasp that appeared on the very first Seamaster Professional back in 1993. It is a bit larger to accommodate the new fine adjustment mechanism, which is handy for when your wrists swell a bit in the summer months. There's just a button here that you press, and you can extend the bracelet, about a half, almost a full length, which again, real handy when humidity makes your wrist swell. I like it a lot. And then the dive suit extension is much the same as found on the previous generations of the Seamaster. Again, it's a very, very well done dive suit extension. Overall, great bracelet. Now, I've certainly heaped many well-deserved accolades on this watch, but let me take a moment to talk about a few things that I actually don't care for. Firstly, this bracelet is billed as having adjustable links fastened with screws, and that's really only sort of true, and I'm surprised that more reviewers don't talk about this. I've actually never heard this mentioned, probably because watch reviewers don't size their own watches. There are screws on either side of the adjustable links, small screws, very small, shallow screws that are horrendously difficult to work with. It's never taken me more than about 15 minutes to remove or add links to a Rolex Oyster bracelet like this one when I needed to size it. But it took me a good 2 hours to size the bracelet for the Bond Seamaster here. I do not recommend that you try to size this bracelet on your own. I lost 3 of those tiny little screws during this process. They are ridiculously small and shallow. And here's the kicker, the screws are really just caps on either side of the adjustable link, which contains a pin that actually is what connects one link to another. I think I might actually prefer the cheaper pushpin adjustable links on the Bond bracelet from 20 years ago. Please, Omega, please give us a better bracelet design. I've also never been a big fan of anti-reflective coatings on both sides of a sapphire crystal, which Omega has done going back to the original model in 1993. This is something that I really have never liked about Omega watches. Now, to be fair, there are other brands that coat both the underside and the top side of the crystal with an anti-reflective coating, which just makes no sense to me. A sapphire crystal is designed to be extremely scratch resistant. Then you go and apply a coating on top of the crystal that shows scratches. Now, Rolex always just coats the undersides of their crystals. You do get more reflections and glare as a result, but I do think it's a better approach. I also don't like the reduced beat frequency of the coaxial escapement movements from Omega. This is kind of a nitpick, it's more of a personal pet peeve. Most watch movements have a beat speed of 28,800 beats per hour. The faster the frequency, the smoother the sweeping motion of the second hand. So the 26,200 beats per hour frequency of Omega's coaxial movements always felt like a step backward in this regard. Now, the current iteration of the Omega Seamaster 300m continues the tradition of being one of the best values in the luxury sport dive watch market, as paradoxical as having the words value and luxury in the same sentence sounds. It's really an absolutely amazing watch, and I was looking for a watch that felt like a good representation of modern horology with all of the latest advances the industry has to offer, but I also wanted something that was decidedly nostalgic in look and feel, and this watch absolutely fits that bill. Now, the current retail price of the Omega Seamaster 300m is $5,400, and Omega provides a 5-year manufacturer's warranty. That's obviously a lot of money for a watch, but keep in mind that the Seamaster 300m is often compared to the Rolex Submariner quite favorably, which will run around double that price, if not more, which is why the Seamaster has always been seen as a genuine value competitor in this segment. I've mentioned the previous iterations of the Bond Seamaster Pro throughout this review, and I've purposely avoided direct comparison. That's because I'll be doing that in a separate video. The last one that I owned was around 2003 or 2004, so nearly 20 years ago. But I have a local friend who still has one of the older first generation Bond Seamasters, and I intend to borrow it for comparison review, so look for that coming very soon. So there you have it. There is my review of the Omega Seamaster 300m. Sorry for the long video, but this watch really does deserve it. Take care, God bless. We'll see you in the next video.
I hope you've enjoyed this production from the Through My Lens YouTube channel. If you did, please click on the like button and do share the video on social media. If you'd like to see more content like it, please do subscribe to the channel, follow me on Instagram and Facebook, and do check out Through My Lens at www.throughmylens.org.